But as she approached, it revealed itself to be a moose carcass. The kill was pretty recent. Too recent. A few years ago, a young woman named Claire Donovan, stressed from the demands of her university studies and the relentless pace of city life, decided to escape it all with a long weekend in the woods. Claire wasn't looking for a cozy cabin or a campground with amenities. No. She craved the isolation of deep woods free camping. In the winter, alone. For Claire, an experienced outdoors woman, it seemed safe enough, even empowering. She relished the freedom that came with being alone in the wilderness, away from the caution and vigilance she always had to maintain in the city. Out here, she thought she was the one in control. She could shed the constant wariness of city life and simply be herself, surrounded by nature's indifferent vastness. The drive to her chosen location took hours, the scenery becoming increasingly wild as she went. She parked her car in a roadside ditch permitted for such use, then hiked deep into the forest with nothing but her compass, a map, and a small backpack. After trekking 4 miles off-road, she found a clearing where she discreetly set up her camp, a tiny tent and a modest fire pit, carefully concealed by the snow. The crisp air and towering pines felt like a protective cocoon, shielding her from the world she'd left behind. For the first 2 days, everything was perfect. Claire spent her time hiking, reading by the fire, and enjoying the stillness of the frozen landscape. She loved the way the snow muted every sound, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. On the 3rd day, she decided to hike a mile to a nearby frozen pond she had scouted on her map for some ice fishing. She'd packed light, just the essentials for the trip back and forth. The woods were eerily quiet that morning. The air was sharp and crisp, the only sounds the occasional chirp of a bird or the distant groan of a half-frozen stream. Claire congratulated herself when her compass led her straight to the pond. She cut a hole in the ice, set up her gear, and within minutes had caught her first fish. But as she cleaned the fish, something felt off. A persistent sound tugged at the edges of her awareness. At first, Claire ignored it, chalking it up to her imagination or the wind. But the sensation grew stronger, more intrusive, like an itch she couldn't scratch. She froze when she realized what it was. Faint, deliberate, whistling. Claire's knife slipped, slicing her hand as her concentration broke. Frustrated and unsettled, she shouted into the void, "Could you stop that damn whistling?" The forest fell silent. Utterly silent. It was then that the true weight of her isolation pressed on her. No one else should have been this deep in the woods, and no hunter would give away their presence with a sound as conspicuous as whistling. Whoever it was had heard her, but they hadn't responded. Not a word, not a sound, just silence. Claire abandoned the fish, hurriedly packed her gear, and started back toward her camp. Her unease grew with every step. The stillness of the forest, once comforting, now felt oppressive. About a 1/4 mile from her camp, she stumbled upon something massive, half buried in the snow. At first, she thought it was maybe a fallen tree, but as she approached, it revealed itself to be a moose carcass. The kill was pretty recent. Too recent. Blood still stained the snow, and its upturned eyes seemed to stare directly at her. A clean bullet hole pierced its skull. Claire's stomach churned with dread. The kill just made no sense. Dragging a moose 5 miles into the woods for a shot? Impossible. Leaving it untouched? Inexplicable. The longer she stood there, the more she felt like the lifeless eye of the animal was accusing her of something. Something she couldn't quite name. Panic set in. She ran, her breath ragged in the freezing air, the forest around her a blur of snow and skeletal trees. By sheer luck, she found her way back to the road. Spotting her car, she sprinted the final stretch, threw herself inside, and sped to the nearest motel. She left her gear, her tent, and everything else behind without a second thought. That night, sitting on the edge of a stiff motel bed with an infomercial droning in the background, Claire tried to piece it all together. Why would the Park Service issue free camping permits in an area where hunting was allowed? Why hadn't she heard the gunshot that killed the moose? And the whistling, was it even real? The questions looped endlessly in her mind, keeping sleep at bay. The next morning, still shaken, she reported what she'd seen to a park ranger. He seemed more concerned about illegal hunting than her story, but when she insisted on showing him the site, he reluctantly agreed. Riding out on an ATV, Claire led the ranger to where the moose had been. The carcass was gone, but the blood-stained snow and a trail of drag marks remained. The ranger's demeanor shifted. He suggested they head back immediately. Once back at the motel, Claire began washing her clothes in the sink, preparing to drive home when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. It was the ranger. His voice was grim. "Miss Donovan, we found the carcass. It was dragged to your campsite." Claire's blood ran cold. "Your tent? Someone cut into it with a knife. It's a mess out there. Your belongings? You don't want them back. They're covered in moose remains." She barely managed to stammer. What happens now?" The ranger sighed. "We'll keep an eye out, but I've never seen anything like this. I'm sorry, Miss Donovan." That might have been the end of it for the ranger, but not for Claire. Over the following weeks, her sleep was plagued by vivid nightmares of the whistling. In her dreams, it wasn't faint, it was deafening, echoing through endless snow-covered forests. And always, in the distance, the lifeless eye of the moose stared back at her. Claire began researching. She dove into forums about strange encounters in the wilderness and true crime stories of hikers gone missing. What she found only deepened her unease. Stories of mysterious disappearances, abandoned campsites with torn tents, and eerie sounds in the woods were more common than she ever imagined. None of them had explanations that felt satisfying. One night, she stumbled upon an old local legend about a hunter who had gone missing in those very woods decades ago. According to the tale, the man had been an expert tracker, known for his eerie ability to move silently through the forest. Locals whispered that he had turned feral, abandoning his humanity to become one with the wilderness. They called him the Whistler. The story chilled Claire to her core. Could it be possible? Had she encountered this whistler? The whistling. It haunted her most. Could it have been an animal? Some rare bird? She replayed the moment in her mind repeatedly. The cadence of the sound had been too deliberate, too human. But why hadn't she seen anyone? How could someone move so quietly in the snow? Months later, Claire received a call from the park ranger. He told her almost offhandedly that a hunter's body had been found several miles from where her campsite had been. The man's throat had been slit and his rifle was missing. "It's probably unrelated," the ranger had said. But Claire could hear the doubt in his voice. She didn't respond. What was there to say? Claire never returned to the woods. The wilderness, once her sanctuary, had become a place of suffocating fear. To this day, she keeps a packed bag by her door, filled with essentials, just in case she ever needs to leave in a hurry. Because while the ranger had dismissed it as a coincidence, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there that night, watching and waiting. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right, she swears she can still hear it. That faint, deliberate whistle.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing and liking the channel. If you know of any eerie stories you'd like exposed, please comment below.